Hello and welcome back to our live streaming coverage from RSAC Conference 2025. I'm Jameson Cush with Informa Tech Target and Ion Tech. And if you missed it earlier, we spoke about quantum preparedness with Rob Clyde and Jamie Norton, both from RSAC. And if you stick around later, we'll be speaking with some of the journalists and experts from Informa Tech Target who are covering the show. Joining me once again from the desk in Broadcast Alley at the Moscone, Jen English. Jen, welcome. How would you rate your quantum preparedness level?
Yes, a 2 out of infinity, probably, very small scale. It was really fascinating just to hear about, are the security pros actually aware of the threat and the benefit that quantum computing can have in their day-to-day lives? We're not quite there yet, maybe 5, 10, 15 years, but it was great to talk with people from RSAC and really get an insight into that.
Absolutely, and I think if we're doing this 15 years from now, quantum would be, or 10 years from now, it would be quantum instead of AI.
Oh yeah.
We're speaking about. But I think we're going to get a lot more grounded now because we are going to dive into the world of security operations and trends in security operations. Here to discuss with us is Andrew Braunberg, a principal analyst with Omdia.
Hello.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Joining us. So you have a very extensive background in cybersecurity and security operations. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Since we're here at RSA, I guess I should say my first one was in 2003. So I've been through, I've had these loafers resold a couple times for this one. I kind of came at it from a journalistic background. I had done a science, technology, and public policy degree, and that kind of got me into science journalism, and then moved into security pretty soon after that, and then moved into the analyst side. I also have had a fair amount of time at a security test house too, to get me a little more grounded in the nuts and bolts.
So what was the buzz in 2003?
You know what? It was such a simple times back then. I mean, the big players were Symantec, McAfee. It was a lot of AI, a lot of endpoint stuff, right? URL filtering, right? Hey, WASR knew. It was just everything we take for granted now was just kind of new then, yeah.
So a few years later,
yes,
we have to ask, AI, how is this intersecting with the day-to-day of SecOps, and what does that look like?
It is. I mean, it's affecting SOCs just like everything else. I would say though, if you think about AI generally in machine learning, I mean, those predictive tools have been around for a long time, helping security analysts, right? I mean, if it's behavior anomaly detection, that sort of thing, it's got a very firm foundation, right? Then we've moved into this kind of chatbot, ChatGPT era, and now at this show particularly, folks thinking about agentic solutions, right? How that plays out, we'll see, but it's, as a term that got used in a presentation I was at yesterday, it's very frothy out there. I think that's probably a good word to think. It's kind of like the ocean here for us, right? But as in every other kind of use case or scenario, there's pluses and minuses for kind of thinking about adopting AI, yeah.
So I heard you before the cameras were rolling, you were talking about data fabrics with Jen. So how does that factor into security use cases for AI?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, so for folks that, data fabric's a little bit of a fuzzy term, but we can think about it as this kind of data management that gives you kind of from many sources to many destinations. Destinations usually being kind of analytic applications, of which there could be many colors, or just maybe many different data storage options, right? And so a data fabric would let you decouple a little bit from your traditional, if we're talking about the SOC use case, decouple a little from that usual SIM pipeline, right? And so on the front end of a traditional, traditional now data fabric kind of architecture, you're going to have a lot of data pipeline management kind of capabilities. Kind of think about it a lot of as the old ETL kind of stuff, and bringing it in, transforming it, maybe enhancing it, and then moving it to a storage location. And I think AI has proven itself already as being really useful for doing a lot of those very kind of traditionally manual but not very exciting kind of tasks. And again, whether that's enrichment or I think an interesting one that kind of speaks particularly to one of the reasons people want to adopt Data Fabric is this idea around data normalization, thinking about a more standardized schema for the data. OCSF is pretty popular right now as being an open standard. Let's use AI, or I should say AI is being used successfully to do that, automate that normalization and really push that data into a schema that, again, is very useful for multiple applications on the analytics side.
So where are enterprises at with actually implementing this data fabric?
Data fabrics, I guess I should say, data fabrics are a concept that's much broader than security. I think maybe security is a little late for kind of bringing in this idea. So there's a couple of use cases that are, I think, kind of leading edge, we can say. One of them certainly is what we could call SIM augmentation. And that's back to this point. Boy, it'd be nice not to rely on that SIM as a proprietary kind of, monolith, if you will. So we can achieve some cost savings if we think about decoupling, from the SIM and being able to use to be a little more selective in how we move data, either to the SIM or maybe some other lower cost choices for storage. So SIM automation or augmentation, I guess it's both, is a good early use case right now. What's interesting is I think, and there's a host of players that are in this space. I think they've had trouble making the argument that, folks should really get out and do these very strategic kind of broad data fabric deployments that are going to set you up for, again, this kind of many-to-many world. And so we've seen a fair number of these guys decide, we need to kind of add some analytics of our own on the back end and really show kind of end-to-end capabilities here. And to me, as a SOC analyst who covers the proactive security space pretty closely, it's been interesting to me to see how many of those folks have decided, we're going to add some exposure management capabilities and kind of show off the way this data fabric really can provide value, right? And so I think we're seeing a lot of movement in that direction. So things are moving. I mean, it's like everything else, it's a bit of a slow process, but I think people are starting to really see the value.
And so from that trend, what are some of the other trends that you're seeing in the space?
Yeah, well, proactive is a big one. And so proactive is this idea of really trying to shift left of boom, if you will, right? So if you're a SOC analyst, 9 times out of 10, you really do see the root cause of this was something we probably could have addressed earlier, but pre-breach if we had, thought to prioritize it, right? And so I think a big driver that has been several years in the making was, that realization that we really need to get ahead of, the detection and response, that threat detection, investigation, and response kind of pipeline. If we got ahead of that with some of these proactive ideas, particularly being more selective in the way we look at patch management and vulnerability management, that would be, more bang for the buck, right? And it's not, no one's saying that those reactive suites, that traditional SOC suite's not going away. What we're trying to do is do enough hygiene on the front end that we can reduce. I mean, the conversation always, every year here, boy, they're overloaded, there's too many alerts. Well, what do we do about it? And a lot of what we've been doing about it is automation, right? Which gets back to the AI, gets back to the SOAR conversation. Like, let's try to figure out how to automate some of these tasks. But the idea of rethinking legacy vulnerability management around this idea of risk-based vulnerability management, I think was kind of an early win from kind of getting people to think, oh, okay, proactive is a way, if we start really thinking about risk reduction as our overall goal, and figuring out how to prioritize and bring some of these traditionally disparate groups together and say, let's really have a very transparent conversation about why this particular exposure, and I guess I should say the difference between exposure and traditional vulnerability management is a broader kind of, you're not just looking at CVEs, you're not just looking at kind of software vulnerabilities. I mean, with everybody having so many cloud assets, we've got to think about misconfigurations. Everyone's got credentials they're worried about, right? So exposure is just a broader term, but same idea. We're going to try to prioritize through a risk-based approach to figure out what do I do next, right? Be very transparent about it. The operational teams, the IT ops has got to be in here, to help do the actual work. And so that proactive kind of trend, I think, is one of the bigger ones that Omdia has been keeping an eye on. And we see certainly a shift in spend towards some of these more proactive applications. And I think, the autonomous SOC would be kind of the three things that this week I'm really probably going to hear more about than maybe I want to, but I will, yeah.
So I'm curious for, looking into the CVEs, the vulnerabilities, and what are the standards, the regulations around that? How can enterprise security teams really prioritize what they want to look at and have the best practices around that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the traditional thing that folks would do is look at the CVSS score, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got a CVE. When they log that, they're going to put a risk score from 1 to 10, and hey, I'll just put all the ones with 9, 10, at the top of I'll put it in a spreadsheet and then I'll sort by CVSS, right? All right, that's not quite the level of prioritization we need now that there's like 300,000 CVEs in the National Vulnerability Database. So the way that you think about, well, how can I be more risk-based, take a risk management kind of point of view to this, really is a combination of bringing together context around the assets that we're talking about, right? So one is just, I need to be able to create a real dynamic and hopefully comprehensive asset inventory, right? A lot of that, we could go down a rabbit hole there, but let's just say you have one, and in the context you bring in needs to be one, internal around criticality of assets, right? And two, external around, well, what do I know about the threat landscape? What do I know about adversarial activity that can help me, prioritize, right? That could be looking at CISA KEV, right? Known vulnerabilities. I know this is active in the wild, that there's an exploit for this particular CVE. Okay, well, you don't need a complicated machine language model to say, all right, there's also something called EPSS, which is an interesting predictive model it looks out about 30 days to say, I think this particular vulnerability is likely to be exploited in the future, so maybe we can use that. And then, a lot of vendors will come at it with their own just deep threat intel, where they're trying to map to particular threat actors. Maybe they're looking at a MITRE ATT&CK as a threat model. And they're thinking specifically about the CVEs that are being used in the wild by particular threat actors for, maybe you're particularly concerned about ransomware. So, you could look at the CVEs that were particular to a threat actor that was attacking financial services organization, right? So there's ways to keep teasing out and try to get a little more granularity in the way you look at the problem. And that's, the combination of way folks do that kind of is a little bit of the secret sauce and how they're trying to give better recommendations.
Now, before we ask you our standard stock last question, I did want to, I saw that earlier you'd written several briefs about exposure management platforms.
Yeah, I mean, we've been watching Proactive for 3 or 4 years now, and we've been you could just see that these tools had to come together into some kind of bundle, right? And as it ends up, exposure management is the kind of platform play for, again, we could have a whole different conversation around our platform's a good idea. I think my take is that there's going to be multiple platforms, but they're going to have different competencies. And I think we need a proactive platform, again, that builds on that asset inventory database and leverages that. And exposure management is that platform. It's pulling in folks from the RBVM space, from all those attack surface management players. And interestingly, a lot of folks just with general SOC stacks, whether it's SIM-SOAR or XDR, are all deciding they need that proactive bit as well. And there is that ability to kind of leverage across that divide between whether there was an initial an adversary has landed in your network or not, and there's those tools can be very helpful. And that context I talked about can be very helpful on both sides of that line.
So the last question we ask everybody, what are you expecting to see? What do you hope to see? What do you hope to get out of the show?
Yeah. I'm expecting to see a lot of agentic AI. I'm expecting to see a lot of autonomous SOC. But as an analyst, I've got a lot of just vendor sit-downs set up, and it's kind of across all the topic areas that I've been talking about, just because they're my areas of interest and the things that I cover. But I do think if it wasn't for just AI really just exploding right now on this agentic side, we'd be hearing a lot more from vendors about their proactive capabilities, because all of these guys are adding exposure. I mean, it's not just these pure plays, it's also, it's Microsoft, it's Palo Alto, just yesterday, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike. A lot of the biggest players are deciding they really need to be in this space as well, so it's very mainstream at this point.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I hope you get what you're looking for.
Be careful.
And more AI.
Right, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us. For Gen English, I'm Jameson Cush. Please come back to us later this afternoon, where we'll be talking to the journalists and experts from Informa Tech Target about what's happening at the show. And before that, please like and subscribe.